Now that phase 2 of the NHL Draft Lottery is complete, we have the full order for the top 15 selection. We're going to be conducting an updated NHL mock draft for those first 15 selections, and that's coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned today, we're doing an updated NHL mock draft for the top 15 selections in round 1 of this year's 2020 NHL Draft. Of course, earlier we had the 2020 NHL Draft Lottery Phase 2, where we learned that the New York Rangers have won the first overall selection. Obviously, the 8 NHL teams who lost in the qualifying round were in the lottery for that opportunity, and the Rangers are the lucky team to go ahead and win. So obviously that's huge news for the Rangers and their fan base. So now we're going to jump in here and do an updated mock draft for the top 15 selections. We're going to start at number 1, which won't be any surprise, and work our way all the way down to number 15. And of course, we know the New York Rangers hold the first overall selection, and I have no doubt that they will select first overall Alexis Lafreniere from the Rimouski Oceanic of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. Of course, Lafreniere is a type of winger who can be a franchise-defining winger, even though he's not a center iceman or a number 1 defenseman. I do believe he can be a major impact player immediately at the NHL level. He's a decent size, 6'1", 192 pounds. He's almost 19 years old. I think he can step in next year, play a top 6 role, and put up some pretty decent points amongst the last 10 or so first overall selections. He certainly ranks right up there. Now, there has been some talk maybe that the Rangers would be better off with a Byfield, considering the winger depth they already have at the NHL level within the prospect level. However, I just don't see a scenario where they don't take Lafreniere. Now, could they maybe trade the pick? Maybe. It is a slim possibility, and I think we could see a lot of activity at this draft. But unless they trade it, they're definitely taking Lafreniere at number 1. Now, selecting second overall is the Los Angeles Kings, and we have them taking German-born forward Tim Stutzle, who's a winger and a center iceman. He can play both positions, has done so in the last few years. Debatable what he's going to be at the NHL level. He may be a top center. He could develop into a solid winger, but either way, he's a tremendously gifted offensively forward. I mean, he could be a really solid fit in Los Angeles. I know some are convinced that the Kings will take Byfield, but there is a lot of talk that they will take the German-born forward here at number 2. Now, very well could be Byfield. It would not be surprising at all. Obviously, either one would be an excellent choice. It's hard to go wrong with all this top talent here, but I guess it'd be well into the future before we really know what the right selection was. But for today, we're saying the Kings select Tim Stutzle. Now, the third overall selection belongs to the Ottawa Senators, and assuming that these 2 players ahead of them go 1-2 as I've selected, they're 100% taking Quinton Byfield of the OHL Sudbury Wolves at number 3 overall. Of course, this pick originally belonged to the San Jose Sharks and was traded to the Senators in the Erik Karlsson trade. So considering the other pieces that the Sharks gave up to the Senators, and then along with this, I must say the Sens made out much better in that trade than many of us originally thought that they did. Now, Byfield's one of the younger players in this draft, not quite 18 years of age yet, but he's already 6'4", 214 pounds, has that projection to be a number 1 dominant center iceman. He's already got the size. He does have NHL size in frame already, but I do think more time in junior would be beneficial for him. Now, the Senators don't have that dominant number 1 center in their system right now. They do have some other decent-looking center prospects. You can even take Colin White, for example, who's not really a prospect anymore. I signed a longer-term contract with the Sens, but I don't see him really projecting long-term to be a number 1 center. I don't have a ton of confidence we're going to see Logan Brown develop into that as well. Josh Norris is pretty good, but again, I think he's a number 2, number 3 guy long-term, so they could really use some top-caliber centers with Byfield on the board. That's definitely who they take. Now, after that, things get a little bit more interesting, and there's more options, and we could see some different movement here. But at number 4, I have the Red Wings selecting Cole Perfetti from Saginaw of the Ontario Hockey League. Now, one knock on Perfetti is that his skating's not as good as it needs to be, but that's certainly something he can work on. Perfetti is an incredibly smart player, one of the highest hockey IQs in this draft, incredibly gifted playmaker. At the same time, he's also kind of known as a shot-first center iceman. So he's really a dominant player with Detroit, taking a defenseman last year, their high pick in Moritz Seider. I do think some would look at Perfetti as being a little bit of a stretch of this selection. I know many people have him ranked a little lower, anywhere from 6, 7, 8 range, and that very well might be more realistic. But Yzerman's not afraid to make that selection, and many feel that Yzerman has his eye on Perfetti, and he is the player for them. If you look at their overall prospect pool, they really need a bit of everything here. You could make an argument that they take the top goalie. You could make an argument to take the top defenseman, and you could make an argument that they take the best available forward, because I really think Detroit really does need a little bit of everything in their system. But for me, I think I've seen enough information out there that Perfetti seems to be the guy they're most interested in. Now, at number 5 overall, we're back to the Senators, this time their own selection. And I have them selecting from the 67s of Ottawa, Marco Rossi. Plays big, but not a big guy. Rossi's short in stature, 5'9", 179, but he's a big-time player. Plays with a lot of heart and a lot of skill. And I do expect the Austrian-born player to potentially be a dominant center. When you add Byfield and Rossi to the Senators mix, that takes him up a major notch. I can see Rossi possibly even hitting the NHL sooner than Byfield. Now, Rossi's a little older. He's already, pushing 19 years of age, whereas Byfield's barely 18. So that extra years is certainly, a big time in their development for sure. I could see Rossi fitting in nicely in Ottawa, and I can see them, even though they have the option here to take a top defenseman like Drysdale. I mean, between what they have already, between Thomas Chabot, Eric Brandstrom, they have a few other defensemen that's decent looking as well. Bernard Docker, obviously even a guy like Christian Rolland is still somewhat of a prospect. Really, I think they have some good deep prospects. And maybe Drysdale's the way they go. Maybe that's what they end up doing. But for me, I would really solidify your center ice position, like I said earlier. I just don't see them having an elite level talent at that position, and it's just so important here. And moving on to number 6, we've got the Anaheim Ducks, and I have them taking the top defenseman, Jamie Drysdale. If you look at their prospect pool makeup right now, the Ducks really could use another top defenseman. Now, they used to have a lot of great D, but they've moved out a lot of them over the years. There's a lot of talk they could move Josh Manson. He's certainly not old, but he's in his late 20s now. You still have Fowler and Lindholm, and they don't really have a ton of really high-end D prospects that are hanging around their system, but they do have a lot of interesting young forwards like Trevor Zegras and Sam Steele and Max Jones. They have a lot of other younger guys that are already trying to get into the mix there. So to me, it makes a lot of sense for them to take the top defenseman, since I have them sliding down here to number 6. I just don't see them passing that up. Now at number 7, we have the New Jersey Devils, and I have them selecting Swedish forward Alexander HOLTZ, who's going to be a top goal-scoring winger at the NHL level. Obviously, he's got decent size, but not overly big, 6 feet tall, 183 pounds. He's about 18 and a half years old presently. Certainly projects to be one of the top goal scorers in this league, and certainly somebody who I think would fit nicely. If you look at Heischer and Hughes, they need a top-scoring winger to play with them, and I certainly think Alexander HOLTZ could certainly play that role no problem. Now, next up, we have the Buffalo Sabres at number 8, and I have them taking another Swedish player. This time they're going with Lucas Raymond. Now, Raymond's a player who could go up and down this draft, and depending on who you ask and who you talk to, he can go anywhere from probably 4 to 10, and it's really going to boil down to what everybody thinks of him. He's certainly a little bit better than a lot of his offensive stats indicate. You got to remember he was playing in a top league, one of the top leagues outside the NHL. And obviously, it's not a league where somebody his age normally puts up a ton of points. But Raymond is certainly a very skilled winger, somebody who certainly projects to be a top 6 winger for sure. At the same time, he can be really hard to play against, really solid both ends of the ice, and he can certainly be a great help to a team like Buffalo, who needs offense and defense. I mean, obviously, amongst the forward group especially, I think Raymond would be a great fit with a guy like Jack Eichel, for example. So I see Raymond being a wise choice here for the Sabres. Now, of course, the last time we did this, that's as far as we knew for sure what the picks were. We now know number 9 belongs to the Minnesota Wild, and I have them taking the other member of the Ottawa 67s, expected to go high in the draft here, and that's Jack Quinn, of course, a right winger, 5'11", 176 pounds, not an overly big guy, but again, just like his teammate in Ottawa, Marco Rossi, plays a big game, can be a really solid goal scorer, and I do think that there's a lot of potential that he can turn into that top 6 forward that the Minnesota Wild need. Of course, they got Kaprizov hopefully jumping into the mix here next year. I know the Wild were really happy to get him signed finally, and they were really hoping to get Lafreniere after they lost to Vancouver to go into that draft lottery. But unfortunately, that did not happen. So I do think Quinn, for where they're picking here, would be the best available for what they really need. Now, moving on to the next pick at number 10, we have the Winnipeg Jets, and I have them taking Finnish player Anton Lundell. Now, Lundell projects to possibly either be a center or a winger, but I think longer term he has a high potential to be a center at the NHL level, and he could probably finally turn into that middle six center that the Winnipeg Jets are desperately missing from their group right now. I mean, they've been looking for that number 2 center. I mean, obviously Brian Little's not getting any younger, and obviously has had a lot of injuries as well, and they really need somebody to jump in there and somebody who can play ideally a 200-foot game, and that's certainly up Lundell's characteristics here. He's so solid on both ends of the ice. He's got decent size, 6'1", 183, almost 19 years of age by the time the season starts. So certainly I think Lundell would be a terrific fit with the Winnipeg Jets here. Now next up, we've got the Nashville Predators selecting at number 11 overall. Nashville Predators selecting Dawson Mercer from Drummondville out of the QMJHL. Of course, Mercer is 6 feet tall, 172 pounds, approaching 19 years of age. He's certainly a very gifted offensive forward, but sometimes I think he kind of flies under the radar a little bit. He made Team Canada for the World Juniors, but certainly didn't get a huge role. Likely goes back to junior, continues to have a strong offensive output, probably gets another opportunity here as well to play for Team Canada, assuming that the World Junior Tournament takes place. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now when it comes to a lot of these tournaments and seasons and how everything is going to work here in the short term. We'll have to wait and be seen, but I think Mercer would be a great fit for the Predators. Now, next up, we have the 12th pick, the Florida Panthers, and I have them taking Jake Sanderson. Now, I think Sanderson is another player, like Lucas Raymond, is difficult to peg exactly where he goes. There's not a great deal of difference in his game compared to Jamie Drysdale. There's so many solid forwards here. I'm just not sure that the teams in the middle here would take him. I mean, Winnipeg certainly has a case to take Sanderson. They could do that over Lundell. I just think they, at the same time, they also need that number 2 center. And I think Lundell may make it to the NHL faster than Sanderson. Sanderson's supposed to be playing U.S. college hockey. So I think it just, gets them a player in their NHL roster sooner. But certainly I think Sanderson makes sense for Winnipeg as well. But I see him going right now, for this draft at least, going to the Panthers. I mean, the Panthers have a lot of great forwards. They could certainly use some help on the blue line, and he'd make a lot of sense for them here as well. Now, next up, we have the number 13 selection, which does technically start off here with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but currently belongs to the Carolina Hurricanes. And, of course, they received that pick in the Patrick Marleau trade. Of course, they gave up that first rounder to basically shed his salary as a cap dump. And of course, the Hurricanes did trade a first-round pick as well to the New York Rangers for the Brady Shea trade. But, of course, they get the option of sending the lower pick, whether it be the Toronto pick or their own selection. And obviously, where they've made it further into playoffs, that will be the pick that goes to New York, and they will hold on to the Leaf pick here, which is the better of the two. Now, I have them taking young goaltender YAROSLAVASKAROV, the top goalie in the draft. And if you look at the Hurricanes' makeup here, they have some great young forwards. They have a really solid blue line. Right now, their goaltending is okay with Peter Mrazek, Reimer. But the long term, those guys aren't going to be there for several years. For example, they do have Nedeljkovic, who I think is a pretty good goalie prospect. But really, this is a can't-miss prospect. This is, some say the best goalie prospect since Carey Price. Obviously, you can, take a look around the NHL. You don't see goalies going super high in the draft, and you don't see them kind of coming in with that much fanfare and that much, highly projected that often. So I think in this case, he's still available. Carolina grabs the goaltender in this scenario. Number 4, we have the Edmonton Oilers. And I have them selecting right winger from the Western Hockey League, the Portland Winterhawks, Seth Jarvis. Now, Jarvis is a really gifted offensive winger, and the Oilers certainly need more depth on the wings in order to take their team up a level. I do think they have some pretty good young, solid D. Obviously, Darnell Nurse is still pretty young. They have Ethan Bear, Caleb Jones, Philip Broberg, Evan Bouchard. So I don't think they need to take a D in this scenario. I think they need to add to their wing depth, and I think based on what's available, Jarvis will be a great pick here. I find Jarvis is another guy that sometimes flies under the radar, but a very gifted winger they could really have an opportunity to scout a lot, being Western Canada. and I think he'd be a terrific selection there. Now, the number 15 pick today belongs to the Pittsburgh Penguins, but that could change. Now, the Pittsburgh Penguins technically owe a first-round pick to the Minnesota Wild as part of that Jason Zucker trade. Now, of course, right now, since this pick is top 15, the Pittsburgh Penguins have 7 days to make a decision on if they're going to give the 2020 pick to Minnesota or defer to next year to 2021. Now, I have the Penguins selecting defenseman Braden Schneider of the Brandon Wheat Kings. Now, he's 6'2", 209 pounds. You know, probably needs a little bit of development, but certainly one of those players who shouldn't take too long to make the NHL. The Penguins obviously have lots of forwards. There's not going to be a lot of opportunities for players to get in the mix there, but on the blue line, they could certainly use some help. There's going to be some turnover there, I think, coming in the next year or two. They need to make some changes. And longer term, I think Schneider would be a good fit there. Now, if this pick is transferred to the Minnesota Wild, again, I think that the pick very well could stay the same. It makes sense for Minnesota to take a defenseman here, given the fact that they already took a forward with their higher selection. But I can see the Wild taking Schneider. I can also see them maybe doing something different because there's still lots of other forwards here that would be interesting. I mean, you got Amirov, you've got Holloway, Connor Zary. There's still lots of great other selections that could be an interesting pick for the Wild if they go in a different direction. So obviously, for me, those are the top 15 selections. Of course, I'd like to know what you think. Of course, you may have different opinions, and that's totally okay. So share your thoughts and comments down below with who you think these teams should be selecting at these picks. And obviously, we'll probably consider doing another one of these, maybe a little closer to the draft time, see if anything changes. Obviously, some of these draft picks could change hands. We could also see some trades. There could be a number of things that kind of impact what these teams might be best looking for. So we may very well do an updated mock draft a little bit closer to draft time. So again, leave me your comments down below. Let me know your thoughts, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.